All right, so now we come to the last part. We've been a bit, it's been a bit difficult to find what distinguishes science from pseudoscience. None of the theories that seem initially plausible seem to work. So now we look at what Lakatos and Kitcher themselves say about this. So they say, no, it's not like everything goes. We can still distinguish science from pseudoscience, but we need to take a different approach. Their views are fairly similar. There's some overlap. So we'll see, we'll talk in our discussion a little bit about whether they're really the same. Okay, so there is something that distinguishes science from pseudoscience, but it's not what we've so far considered. Okay, so Lakatos has the following idea. The important thing that the theories so far, the theories of what distinguishes science from pseudoscience, what they have not really seen is they haven't looked at the right unit for evaluation, to evaluate whether something is a science. What we need to do is not look at a single statement or a bag of statements. We need to look at what he calls research programs. So what's a research program? A research program has sort of three things. On the one hand, there's a hard theoretical core. This is the core ideas in sort of research in the program. So, for example, in the research, take a research program, Darwinian view of evolution. That could be a research program. It has a hard theoretical core. That core says that animals have, organisms generally have evolved over a long periods of time, millions of years. Then there is the theory of natural selection, that the changes in populations of organisms are due to chance variation and then survival of the fittest, something of that sort. So these are the core of the scientific theory. Then it has auxiliary assumptions that it also makes. These are sort of protect the theory from showing to be wrong. So, for example, the auxiliary assumption might be that, in fact, the planet is a certain age. That it is not just 5,000 years old; it's millions of years old. It makes assumptions about the existence of some sort of material that can be given from one generation to the other. It makes assumptions about how organisms, for example, the sexual interaction with organisms, how that produces novel variations. So there's lots of additional assumptions. So they protect it from being easily shown wrong. And then it uses certain strategies to solve problems, to explain things, and to solve various issues. Okay. So that's a science. So that's a science that has a core, auxiliary assumptions, and a problem-solving machinery. Or there's another depiction. Science has a hard core, and then it has like a protective belt, and then certain problem-solving capacities. Okay? So like a superhero. And now we can distinguish a flourishing research program from one that's what he calls degenerating, Lakatos, in that a flourishing research program will make new and surprising predictions, whereas a degenerating one only really explains old facts that we already knew about and explains away deviations. So, for example, Newton's theory made a surprising prediction that no one expected at the time. People at that time thought that comets just come once and then they disappear forever. That was a common view. So Newton's theory made the prediction that comets would recur at particular times. It was possible to calculate how long it would take for a comet to return. And so it made a prediction that, for example, the comet Halley would return every 75 years, and that was observed to be true. And so that made a surprising and true prediction, and that is the hallmark of a good science. And what Lakatos argues is that pseudoscience doesn't have those features. when it's a degenerating research program, it's just occupied all this energy in trying to protect itself rather than come out and make new predictions and that then turn out to be true. So there's some truth to falsificationism in the sense that it is indeed true that a scientific theory sticks its head out, is courageous, a good scientific theory. But we need to look at not a bag of statements or a specific scientific statement, but we need to look at the research program. Is that a program that makes surprising predictions that could be false and could be true, and it sticks its head out and then is proven again and again true? So that is an indication of a good scientific theory, according to Lakatos. Kitcher has a similar idea. He talks about features of successful science. So like Lakatos thinks that a scientific theory does indeed use auxiliary assumptions. It's never testable by itself. But good auxiliary assumptions are not just there to protect the theory. So it is a protective belt, but the belt, as it were, isn't just there to protect. It's independently testable. So for example, it is an assumption in the theory of evolution that the planet has a certain age. But that is not just, that is an assumption that can be tested completely independently of the theory of evolution. For example, using physics and radioactive dating of materials. It can be tested completely independently of that. So there's a good auxiliary assumption. If you have an auxiliary assumption whose only pointed purpose is to protect the theory, that's a bad auxiliary assumption. Another good making thing about science is that good science should be unified. So that hard core should have a unified strategy for problem solving. So for example, in the case of the theory of evolution, we have this strategy to explain features we find in the world, and it uses the same idea again and again, and it makes surprising explanations of things that you wouldn't think are even connected. So, why are there so many different orchids? Like you see these flowers, why they have produced so many different flowers? The theory of evolution explains that through a variation in natural selection. Why do these birds of paradise have such fancy feathers like you see in the middle? The same strategy applies. Why do we get something like the complex eye that we have? The theory of natural selection variation explains that. Why do different fish have blood cells that are so similar? Why they're different from other animals? The theory of natural selection explains that. And it explains even things that you'd never thought about until very recently. For example, the theory of natural selection explains why, for example, mutations arise in the coronavirus and why they're successful. Explained by the theory of natural selection because it's created for this virus an environment where being more contagious makes it more likely that those viruses replicate by being given from one person to another. And so there's going to be selection pressure for the arrival of mutations generated through the coronavirus restrictions, indeed. So it explains lots of things that you'd never thought about are unified in a unified fashion. That's, again, successful science. And finally, good science has what Kitcher calls fecundity. So it generates new areas of research. The theory of evolution is not this isolated unit. It's generated molecular biology. It's generated population genetics. It's generated lots of new science in the last 150, 200 years. And so that, again, is a sign of good a sign of good science, that it generates new research. So a research program of successful science is one that makes surprising predictions, one that has a unified explanatory strategy, that generates new research, and that has auxiliary assumptions that are independently testable. So these are maybe this is not this one idea that distinguishes science, but like when we look at these various things, then we'll hope to see what is really scientific and what isn't scientific. Okay, thanks for that. And with that, we have reached the end of this lecture, and I look forward to our discussions on Friday.